My name is Rob Schwer. I'm the executive director of the Give Back Yoga Foundation and Give Back Yoga University. Thank you all for joining us today to spend 90 minutes honoring Rama Jyoti Vernon. By way of introduction, Rama had her first yoga class early on, age 15. In the 60s and the 70s, she sponsored many gurus and swamis who came to the United States, and she essentially led the way with the migration of yoga from the East to the West. She started the first yoga teacher training programs, and she laid the foundation for the first BKS Iyengar Association in the Bay Area. She was a world peace activist using a style of conflict resolution she created on the Yoga Sutras. She organized, get this, nearly 50 trips for groups of citizen diplomats to go to the Soviet Union in the 1980s, where she collected doctors and engineers and physicists to go to the Soviet Union. And those interactions among the citizens of the US and the USSR were considered a force in ending the Cold War. She founded the California Yoga Teachers Association. She co-founded the Yoga Journal and initiated numerous organizations, including Unity in Yoga, which evolved into the Yoga Alliance. So this special event is being delivered to honor Rama's legacy. It's been planned by some of those who are and have been extremely close to Rama and her life. And I know that there are many people out there who also feel that closeness and proximity, because how could you not? But we had to limit the number of panelists today, so please make your thoughts and comments available in the chat. And over the next 90 minutes, we're going to share with you an overview of Rama's family background and her work with the Soviet Union and other international work. We'll have a sort of popcorn style panel discussion on Rama's contributions to the teachings of yoga, and also some perspectives that she had on the current state of yoga, and how some of that is being moved forward. So we're going to begin with an introduction of the panelists and their connection to Rama before we dive into her family background. And I'm just going to start. I met Rama at the Sedona Yoga Festival, and I came to her session about 10 minutes early, and she was in shoulder stand, which is the cover of her book, The Queen of the Asanas. And I think of Rama as the queen of yoga in this country. And it was only later in Palestine, over a cup of tea, when I could ask her about that posture. And it struck me when I went in there, and I just sat there for 10 minutes before she even started. I got a little nervous that she was holding this posture for 10 minutes before she was speaking. And I shared with her my nervousness over a cup of tea. And I hope to share that with everyone during this session. So without further ado, let me hand this over to the panelists. Mira, please introduce yourselves and explain your connection to Rama. Obviously, you have a big one.
Yes, thank you. And first, I just want to say thank you, Rob, for spearheading this gathering and bringing us together. I think it's so important to honor this incredible life and legacy of Rama. And so I'm really pleased for all of you who are attending and all the people who have put so much work into making this happen. I am Mira Murphy, and I am Rama's daughter. I am her last of 5 children. And I was born in her Soviet Union years and nearly born in the Soviet Union, and went over as a baby many times with her on many trips to Russia, went to yoga conferences with her. So I grew up with her and her work and traveling with her on the road. And my mother and I have a very shared dharmic path together. And so I've also been part of helping her in her later years to leave her legacy and to work with her writing and traveling with her on the road, helping her with her teaching and helping her with being her Sherpa, I call it, carrying her bags so she can get where she needs to go. And she has a big and beautiful life, and she's touched so many souls. And I'm just dedicated to helping her work continue its ripple into the world because it's magnificent. And I'm just grateful to be here with you all and share what I know and can share about her life and legacy.
Maha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maha. I'm calling in from Palestine. And I am so deeply honored to be here today to celebrate the life and legacy of Rama. This is, I'm so touched beyond belief. And I have Rob to thank for introducing Rama into my life. Rob organized a trip for Rama and Sraddha, himself and some others, to come and teach here in Palestine through the yoga center that I co-founded here in Palestine, the first one. And meeting Rama was life-changing for me and also for the yoga movement here in Palestine. To have someone with such depth and wisdom and heart and soul to be here and share her light was felt and touched by myself and everyone she came in touch with. And there's so many stories to share. I think Sraddha will be able to share them of what she was able to transmit while she was here, and so grateful for that. Rama was also a mentor. We kept in touch, sending emails quite a bit. And she always knew when to reach out when I was in a yoga crisis, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Should I be teaching? And then I'd get this note from her, this email saying, keep teaching, just out of the blue. And so I'm forever grateful to her for that as well. And I'll stop now because time is short, but yeah, I look forward to sharing all the memories and stories as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Sraddha. You're on mute.
You're muted, Sraddha.
All right, I'm Sraddha. I'm here in Sedona, and I met Rama in 1995 in Jerusalem. And then in 1998, started studying with her, and she became my primary teacher and mentor in yoga. I have had Seven Centers Yoga Arts here in Sedona, and it became a home for trainings, yoga teacher trainings, of which I used Rama's work to teach 200-hour and 300-hour students what it is that she had to offer. And she often came to the center. She asked me to be a teacher to her daughter, Mira. And so Mira came and was in a teacher training and then went on to become an Ayurvedic chef at Seven Centers as well. So there's been a sort of a family sense for a while. So I'll just leave it at that. There's lots of history. So thank you.
Ginny?
I'm Ginny Beal. I'm in Tucson, and I wanted to thank you, Rob, for giving us this opportunity to dig into many files and find treasures about our dear Rama. I met Rama at a workshop at Sraddha's beautiful school in Sedona, Seven Centers, in the year 2000. And shortly after that, 2001, in Tucson, we were able to bring her here. She, as you all know, she had a tendency to say yes to any request, almost any request. So we had the blessing of having her come to teach us, a number of us, for 10 months, once a month for 10 months. At the end of that time, I helped her organize in 2002 her last trip to India. And for nearly 20 years, I've been helping her in many ways. I was a co-Sherpa. Mira mentioned being a Sherpa. I was so profoundly affected by Rama's teachings, asana, as well as the science and philosophy of yoga, that I made it a big part of my life for 20 years to reach as many students as possible with her work. And we did that through workshops and retreats and conferences, but we also managed to produce some books and CDs. And so we're just blessed that we have some things, and there will be more coming. So thank you.
Hansa.
So thank you so much, first of all, Rob, and for Give Back Yoga University for delving into not just tools of yoga, but the depth and breadth that is really mirrored and brought into this world by who I call the grandmother of yoga in America. I'm sorry, I might tear up, but anyway, I first met Rama in 1995. I had to go back and figure this out because I'm not good with dates. But I was, they were doing what ended up being the last Unity in Yoga conference. And I was asked to run their bookshop. And in those days, what happened is everybody sent their books in, and then I set up a room and set up the cash registers and all of that kind of stuff, and sold books. And just so you know, in 3 days, our profit was over $12,000, which could tell you how much in 1995 the little shop was doing. But halfway through the conference, just before, this wonderful speaker was supposed to give a thing. They said, there's a teacher who's coming in late and she wants you to put her products out. And I'm boiling inside. I'm going to be late. I need to do this. And all of a sudden, here comes this lady of grace walking into the room. And she says, it'll only take a little space. And I melted and reprogrammed all the computers really fast, and then ran over, and she was the guest speaker. Because I didn't know at that time that she was the one who was the guest speaker. And from then on, our paths crossed many times. She was the one who would come up to me and say, you can teach this. Will you teach this for me? Or you can help with my program here if you can teach this. She drew out of me things that I did not know that I knew. And that was Rama, was empowering other people. And I feel so much, I was on the periphery of, so many of you people have done so many wonderful things, and I see these names and I know what you've done with Rama. I feel so periphery. And so I feel really honored, and I thank you for bringing me and allowing me to be on this panel, because Rama is who she was, and she kind of lives in my heart all the time. David.
Thank you. David?
I'll also start with gratitude for Give Back Yoga University and for Rama, the foremother of Western yoga, and the person maybe primarily responsible for much of what is good in yoga today through the chains and channels and links that she created. I first met Rama through my teacher, Sraddha Sagar, at Seven Centers Yoga Arts, probably back in maybe 2006, something like that. And Rama's work with the mind, and in particular on conflict resolution, was the life-changing moment in my life when she introduced me to a new understanding of the internal experience and how it affects the external experience. That work served me as I later became the CEO of Kripalu and the CEO of Yoga Alliance, further connecting Rama and myself, as she was one of course, the co-founders, as mentioned, of Unity in Yoga, which was the precursor to Yoga Alliance. And a big part of me taking that job was actually knowing that it would help maybe restore and reinforce and embolden her legacy. If we could, chart a new course for Yoga Alliance a few years ago, and that's what I hope is happening now. My heart is always with Rama and my teacher, Sraddha, who I think through my hands and the hands of the many people who have assisted me as yogis over these years, have tried to do our part to move forward the legacy of healthy Western yoga. And I'm just really honored to be here as well, and humbled to be able to honor Rama in this way.
Thank you, David. Mira, floor is yours. You're muted. Oh, yeah.
Mira, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. So thank you everyone for sharing. And we're going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation here to give the breadth and depth of her life. We want to give a caveat and an apology already for anything that we may be leaving out, or any people we may be leaving out. There's so much to cover in the deep and amazing productive life that she lived. And our time is limited here, so we're going to be giving a little bit more of a surface overview and focusing more on her impact into the yoga community. So we just want to say that right off. And we will be starting with her voice to open our time here together. This is her speaking of the first of the Yoga Sutras. And it's a wonderful way to kind of open the space into the journey we'll take together, learning of her life and her teachings.
So let's just center ourselves and close our eyes for a moment. And just observe your breathing, which is the essence of yoga. And I'm just going to chant the very first sutra, which is not really a sutra, but it is like the preparations to receive the light and knowledge of this vast universal work. And this says, Ata and now, everything you've done this life, everything you've done that's brought you to this moment, to hear, to learn about the sutras, and now. It's a very powerful statement. And now, At. And then yoga. As we know, yoga means union, but I found it doesn't mean becoming one with. It doesn't mean the yoking, the joining, the harnessing of the individual to the universal. But we cannot join anything that has never been separated. So yoga is releasing the impediments that keep us from realizing that we are already one with the universal source. Ata yoga, nu. Anu means to flow along with. And shasa is the scriptures, the shastras of yoga. And nam means to revere. So with the very first sutra, Patanjali gives us an entrance into this vast study. And now we will follow along with the scriptures of yoga and revere them. Hatha Yoga Anushasana is a sutra, the vibration of which invokes the universal light of intelligence to illumine our mind and our hearts so that the vast revelation of yoga reveals itself. We ask for that understanding to be with us these moments.
Okay. So this is, I just wanted to say here on the left, a picture of her as a baby at 2 months old. We're going to give a little background and context of her family history before diving into her work in the world. And she was born as Carol Jean David, and in 1941.
So,
This is, she's gone by many names in her life. At one point, Jyoti was given to her. And this is a quote from the Yoga Journal that I feel really expresses the true essence of who she is in the world and how she inspired many people and many organizations. And so this is a quote from the Yoga Journal from 1974. And it says, "The name Jyoti means light, a flame that sparks other flames. Rama Jyoti exemplifies this. Her own enthusiasm has undoubtedly sparked many others, such that not only does it touch the ideas of the moment, also is able to bring these ideas to fruition." So not only did she have potent vision of change, but she also had the impetus and the ability to bring forth that change. So this is a picture of her family, missing her younger brother, Rick, but here she is on the bottom right hand corner. And this is on the left, her sister, Susie, and behind her, her brother, Frank. This is her father, Dr. Thomas David, and her mother, Gaida. And so her parents were she had a very eccentric and unusual childhood. Her parents were very deeply metaphysical and connected with the natural health, pioneers in the natural health field at the time. And so this very much influenced her upbringing, and her work from her parents carried through into her own work in her life with yoga and also with health and her knowledge of the body. Here is a picture of her grandfather, who put together a chart of the face and the organs connected to different parts of the face. And this is a picture of a reflexology, which was very much her mother's work, her knowledge of reflexology. And so both her parents really understood the connectivity of the organ systems to all parts of the body. And this was something that she learned at a very young age and at a very deep level. And it always influenced her work in yoga, was her understanding of yoga therapy and how the movement practices, nutrition, how all of these things in the body were interconnected. Her father was one of the first chiropractors in the nation. And this was a time when they called chiropractors bone benders. And he had to march on the streets for the rights of natural health care practitioners and for the field of chiropractic, and was actually jailed for his protests. And when they finally allowed the first of the chiropractic licenses for them to be licensed healthcare practitioners, he was among the very first. He actually was supposed to have the very first license of chiropractic, but they couldn't find him. I think he was in the bathroom at the time they were starting to give them out. So he was like number 23 or something like that. But he was supposed to be the first to ever receive the license in chiropractic. And he was an incredible man who brought forth amazing wisdom and knowledge and passed this to his children. My mom talks about him pontificating at meal times about nutrition. He always fed them the healthiest food and herbal medicine and tinctures, and would talk about the importance of chewing. He would take them out into the dew at dawn and make them run around barefoot to improve their immunity. And so he would parade them around every dawn in front of the neighbors, running barefoot in the grass outside their house. And so in many ways, he instilled this understanding of health and the cycles of nature and these healthy practices, as well as he brought in many colleagues into the home. And their home was actually a place of a hub of healthcare practitioners and new thought thinkers of the time. There were many classes and lectures that went on in the home as the children were kind of coming in and running around and doing their own thing. They were surrounded by some amazing thinkers of the time, which very much influenced her. They had people like Dr. William Bates, who was a specialist on the eyes, and my grandfather, Dr. Thomas David, took a lot of that into his practice and specialized in eye health using natural methods of nutrition and eye exercises. And so that's what this brochure is on the right. And also influenced by Gina Seminara, who was a student of Edgar Cayce, who helped my mom understand her own past life memories. And so she was having these experiences at a very young age. And because of the community that surrounded her, she was supported in her understanding of these experiences. The Church of Religious Science was something my grandmother was very involved in. And this helped my mom understand new thought and how our thoughts shape reality. And she was very much influenced by Dale Carnegie, who was in their home teaching. A quote from him that she has used throughout all her teachings and writings, he has said, "Thoughts produced in mind produce after their kind." So this idea that our thought creates our reality has been something that has influenced her and come to her teachings throughout her life. Okay, so her parents gave her a wonderful container and a love of anatomy. She had skeletons in her closet that, an actual skeleton in the closet that helped her learn and develop a deep love of anatomy that came through her teachings in yoga. And so all of this was such an osmotic understanding. It flowed through her in all of her teachings. She also never had any antibiotics or pain medication, and this very much influenced her philosophy on health. And her father said, never take pain medication, trace the pain to its source and the root. And very much this is what yoga is doing, is taking us out of the pain at the very root of the subconscious mind. So at a young age, she understood not to mask pain, but to actually trace pain and get to the root of it and unravel it from its source. So these are some of her early influences. Actually, it was her mother who brought her to her first yoga class because she developed a love and an unrequited love, and she was very brokenhearted at a very young age. And she got also very sick. She had a weak lungs, and she got sick with bronchitis chronically. And she was so weak at a point with bronchitis and with a broken heart, she said she could barely walk across the room. And so her mother was a student actually of Yogananda. And so she understood prana and the movement of energy. And she took her daughter to her first pranayama class. Pranayama was actually my mother's introduction into the yoga world. And she shows up to this class and she watches this man bring his hands to his nostrils to do alternate nostril breathing. And she said that he moved his hand through space so that he did not disturb a molecule of the air. And it just melted her. And she said, wow, I want that peace. And that was the first flame in her heart for yoga. And so she studied with this pranayama master. She also watched Lilias Folan on TV at the time. And that was her introduction into asana. Here on the left is Indra Devi. Indra Devi came into her life through this book, Forever Young, Forever Healthy, which was brought to her at a time that she was pregnant with her second child. And her second husband brought this book to her because she had, again, needed to fortify her health. And so this book really influenced her journey and got her deep into asana. She studied with Walton Magana Baptiste, one of the only yoga classes available at the time. And she also got involved with California Institute of Asian Studies, which became a very, very important place of study of many different teachers. Here on the right, she's pictured with Dr. Haridas Chowdhury. This was her Sanskrit teacher, and he was a very close to her and a very deep influence on her. And here she is with her colleague, Hilary Anderson. And Dr. Chowdhury was very close with her and very deep influence. She ended up teaching at the California Institute of Asian Studies. This school is still in existence, and it's now called the California Institute of Integral Studies. So this became a very important hub of the time. She was introduced to Sant Keshavadas, and this is a very, very important teacher in her world. He is a living saint. He was called the Nightingale of India, and he has an ashram in southern India. He has passed on, but his wife is there at the ashram in southern India near Bangalore. And he became very close with Rama, with my mother, that he stayed in her home in the Bay Area. He was very close with her family. He was a bhakti, and he inspired bhakti in my mother. And she said for 2 years, she was drunk with the love of God. She went everywhere barefoot. She would forget her shoes. She would forget her purse. She was just in this state, in deep bhakti and love of God. And Sant Keshavadas was a deep inspiration for her. And they traveled together. She went with him to India. This picture on the right is a picture of them on a trip in India, from a column written about that trip and her experiences in India. And he stayed many times. This on the left, on top, is a picture of her husband at the time, Eugene Vernon, now Ron Vernon, and Sant Keshavadas and his wife there. And so there they are all together. And my sister Erin was very, very close with Sanchi. They called him Sanchi. And was deep bhakti and felt that he was a godfather to her. So he was in the home, he was in the family. Here she is with him doing satsang. He was part of every Friday night satsang in her home. And he was an intermediary to introduce her to many of the masters and gurus that became a part of her home and a part of the scene, developing and growing in California and the Bay Area, that became really the hub of where yoga spread from. And so these are some of the masters that came through her home. She had a beautiful home in Berkeley, the Maybach House, and big, beautiful home with a big room that was the yoga room. And all of the yoga masters would come and every Friday night would give a satsang, and she had different teachers. So just like her own family and her parents became a hub of the natural health field with all these people coming through to lecture, her home became the same for the yoga world. It became a foundation for the yoga scene to develop and grow. And so here we have Indra Devi, as mentioned before, who's known as the first lady of yoga. And here she is the only lady with all of these men. And as she is called the first lady of yoga, my mother's also called the grandmother of yoga. And so she was very much intrinsic and moving forward, bringing these masters into her home, sharing these teachings with people of the US. And so here we have Swami Vishnu Devananda. He was someone that my mom deeply desired to study with and wanted to go and take a course with him, but her husband didn't want to pay the money for her to go. And so she manifested it by just having him in her home. And he asked her to take him driving to Grass Valley to view some land. He wanted to buy land to create a yoga center. And so she drove him up there, and she said, as he walked around the land, eating a banana, he got the whole vision of what is now the yoga farm in Grass Valley. And he saw the pond. He said, I'll put the center over there and over here. By the time he finished the banana, he threw the peel on the ground and decided he would buy the land for the center. And it was her husband who did the legal paperwork to help form the yoga farm. And then he invited her to all of his teachings. And so this is how she was able to study with him deeper. Swami Bhimsen is someone, one of the masters who came. She said he came for lunch and then he lived there for 2 years. So he stayed and lived in their home for years, and he would do his Durga Puja every day, and 5 times a day he would do his ceremonial bathing. And at the time, her husband at the time, Eugene Vernon, was a little bit stingy with all of the bills, and he got really tired of the water bill being so high. So he said, no more of this. So Swami Bhimsen ended up going out to their pool, and at 4 a.m. in the freezing cold, he was splashing himself from the pool water to do his ceremonial bathing. And so like this, you know, all of these Swamis were very much in their home and part of her family. Swami Jyotirmayananda was one of her wonderful teachers, and he is the one who gave her the name Rama. And so from Jyoti, which is the light, she always says it's not the brightest light, but it is the steadiest of the flames that is the light for all of the other flames. And so she carried the name Jyoti for a while. Jyotirmayananda felt that she needed more of a strength and masculine name, and this is where the name Rama came in. And she kept Jyoti as her middle name. And Rama, she felt, was the name that empowered her and gave her the strength and power to ultimately do the international work that we'll visit later. And Swami Satchidananda was very close and important in her work, and especially moving into the international work. And Hansa, would you like to speak more to Swami Satchidananda?
Just a short statement right now is Swami Satchidananda felt it was really important to bring all the different traditions and teachers together, which we'll be addressing later. But it was from him that Rama went over to Sanal, which was the inspiration to start Unity in Yoga. And Rama had many stories to tell of his influence. And again, I think the biggest one was go out and bring the yoga traditions together. Find a way to create the harmony instead of competition, because yoga is about working to enlighten according, or not necessarily enlighten, but to draw people out according to how they can be taught. And each teacher had a different gift. And this is one of the important things that Rama really passed on, is you've got to find a teacher that's going to help you fill your well. And that might be many teachers, which is what we see. Rama had many teachers, each of them taking that foundation and giving her the ability to be with so many people and deepening who she was herself. Mira.
Thank you. Now we have her introduction to Iyengar, who is a very important teacher in her world, who she got in touch with his teachings, and when she was on a trip in India, very much desired to study with him. But he never had his address known, and it was always a little bit of a mystery how to get in touch with Iyengar. And it was the very last 2 days of her trip. She was hosted in someone's home, and it turned out the daughter of her host was a student of Mr. Iyengar. And just in the morning, as they were having breakfast together and she was asking her about her day, she said, I'm going to go and study with Mr. Iyengar. And so this was my mom's gateway into being able to have contact and become one of his students. And she ended up canceling her ticket and staying in India in order to study with him and become his student. It took her a lot of convincing to get him to come to the US. But my mom was very persistent. She understood if you request 3 times, then it must be granted. And so she kept at him, and eventually he was convinced. And this is a picture of her and her husband hosting Mr. Iyengar in their home in Berkeley. And he came many times to stay with them, to give teachings in America. She traveled to India many times and was one of his top students. She traveled with him all throughout India and trained with him, and became someone he used for demonstration because she was very beautiful in her asana. And she spent many mornings working out with him in the morning and doing yoga with him as he stayed in her home. And so I'll turn it over to Sraddha for any more you'd like to share on Mr. Iyengar.
So Rama would share the story of this change that came as a result of Iyengar, Mr. Iyengar. She always spoke about him very respectfully as Mr. Iyengar when he came into her life, and she was so impressed and so taken with the knowledge that he had. And prior to Mr. Iyengar, when she would teach yoga, she mentioned in the Berkeley area, she would have always be in a room that was dimly lit with candles. And she said oftentimes her students could not even see her. They didn't even know who her teacher was because they never saw her in the light. And she talked about somebody coming up to her in the store and saying, "Are you my teacher? Are you my yoga teacher?" Because she liked going into and offering the yoga from this place of this internal place, this place of the darkness, that place. And when she met Mr. Iyengar, he saw how she was teaching yoga and he said, "Turn on the lights." And so the candles went out, the lights went on, and all of a sudden everybody could see each other. And this was something that she said some of her students missed. They missed the old days of her candlelit yoga classes. But this was really about Rama's introduction into what Mr. Iyengar had to offer, which was his brilliance with alignment and his understanding of the body. And so what occurred with him were these years and years of study, this combination of working with anatomy and angles and using the asana and the form as yantra, and to be able to understand that. And she said there would be a part of her that would occasionally stop because it was hard. It was externally focused. It was, it had a strong masculine energy to it, this looking from the outside. And so every once in a while, there would be this longing to go back to that internal space with the yoga. And she would say, "Mr. Iyengar, when are we going to talk about the breath with the asana?" Because he never taught asana with breath. And he said, "Never." Or he actually said, first he said, "You will start with the breath when you find the perfection in the asana." And she said, "Well, when will that be, Mr. Iyengar?" And he said, "Never. You will never find the perfection of the asana. Keep going." And so she did keep going, but part of her journey in yoga was this feeling of things, while there had been this extraordinary opening to the outer world and to the understanding of the body and the understanding and the use of props. Now, this was, again, one of Iyengar's great contributions, was the bringing in of props in order that one could find a pose with assistance and support, rather than try to do a pose and never experience what the lines and the angles and the flow of energy was. And so somewhere around the 10th year of her study, she had started to notice that she was closing down. There was a part of her that would close down around this focus on the muscles, upon the joints and such. And this was the beginning of the seeking for where was that missing piece. And that had to do with the breath. That was something that she found in her beginning classes with Angela Farmer. So here we have Angela and Victor. Now, all three of them were senior teachers of Iyengar. There was a small group of maybe 6 or 8 teachers that were quite extraordinary in their capacity for asana. And they were the ones that were the first foundation, the first lead teachers of the Iyengar method. And Angela had gone through her own sort of separation. And in the process of that, she had started to explore breath. How do you have breath with the asana? And she became a kind of inspiration for Rama. And it was the entry of focusing upon the breath going into the spine through what has become called the back breathing. This is where the root and the inception of it came from Angela. And then Rama took this further. And I think this is an important thing to notice, is that if you see all of the masters, with the exception of Indra Devi, what you see are men. And one of the things that I observed and felt is that she brought this matriarchal aspect into asana. And the matriarchal or the feminine aspect was, you can look at the life from the outside, which is much more of the patriarchal, or we could talk about it from the brain. You can look at it from the left brain. And then you have this taking the asana from the inside. And this is actually where Rama gravitated to. So what she found in her understanding of the brain was that when you put all this focus on the outside, that one remained in the left brain structure, and that this was the sympathetic system. But if you started with the parasympathetic, if you started with the breath, and then you moved into the form, in this way, you could join both worlds. You could integrate both right and left brain. You could integrate the male and the female. You could integrate the polarities. And this is actually where this started to come out, is during this transition in time out of Iyengar, inspired by Angela Farmer. And this then became what has become known as Rama's style of yoga, the back breathing as a way of entering into asana. And I'll just say one more thing, which is that in classical yoga, and this came from India, there was a general looking down upon asana as being very basic aspect of yoga, that one would study the Hatha yoga in order to be able to get into the deeper studies of yoga or the more advanced practices. But for Rama, that was not the case. By using the breath, what she found is she was able to experience mystical states within the form, within the asana. And so we talk about this bridging from east to west. This was her gift. It was east to west. It was the right and the left brain. It was the male and the female. This was her exploration through yoga. She often spoke about, with a laugh, it was kind of a joke for her, she called herself spiritually promiscuous. And this is because in her early years, again, if you go back to classical tradition of yoga, you have the guru-disciple relationship. You find the guru and then you surrender to the guru. So early on, she would find a teacher and she'd always ask the teacher, "Are you my guru?" And the teacher would say, "No, I'm not your guru." And she did this many times. And she finally realized that her path, or her dharma, as Mira has pointed out, in this lifetime was not to have an outer guru, but to work with the inner, and that she was to find that within herself. And so this is the direction, was going within and finding that part, that guru, that teacher within, and letting that be, surrendering to that aspect. This is important because she also, the way she taught was not in a hierarchical way with her students. So even if her students wanted to make her a guru, she always refused that. There were times when, just from a pure logistical point of view, we wanted to codify Rama's style and her breathing and who she was and give it a name. And she refused that as well. She just said, "This is yoga. What I am teaching is yoga." And so she stayed away from calling what she did by her name, like a Rama yoga. She said, "No, this is just yoga. This is this integration." And this is what I'm doing.
Okay, so here we have, thank you for that, Sraddha. Here we have a clip of her speaking about the Guru. This is at a Yoga and Unity and Yoga conference from 1993. And then after this clip, we're going to open it up to the panel to discuss this idea of the student-teacher relationship and how lineages have been affected in the modern day practice of yoga. Sorry, technical glitch. Let's see here. So why don't let's begin the discussion and for the panel, and then I will kind of work on the technological thing and see if we can share the clip at the end after the discussion. So I open it to the panel to talk about this aspect of lineage, which was very deep in my mother's life, and also these student-teacher relations and how the modern world has shifted around all of this.
I will just jump in and say about this clip that I hope that we're able to see, if God willing. And we do have to say that whenever technology and Rama do not mix, there is a consistent pattern that whenever anything technological could go wrong, it would go wrong with her. So in this clip, she's speaking about the relationship between the teacher and the student. And she's speaking about how the importance of the student paying attention to the teaching rather than attaching to the teacher. And of course, she's very eloquent. Whenever Rama spoke, she was channeling from this place within herself of wisdom that she would share. And this was her counsel to us. She encouraged us to keep connected to the teachings. For one thing, we've all experienced, and we've certainly seen it in our community and also in our political community and such. Human beings can have a reputation at one point in their life, and then things occur and their reputation shifts and changes, and there can be disappointment over a leader, a person of authority, somebody who's been an icon. And are we ready?
Yeah, it'll play here.
Well, go ahead and I'll pick up later.
It's a very interesting thing because I've always thought of the guru or the teacher as the finger that points the beauty of the moon. And what happens and what has happened in our society, in many societies, is that sometimes we hear the beautiful, eloquent, inspiring words from those teachers that are pointing to the beauty of the universal light of oneness. But instead of looking to that light and to the beauty of the moon, we have a tendency to attach to the finger.
Good teacher to take you on it. There's different levels, and each level brings you to another level. You have to determine for yourself who that teacher is for you.
Gu means darkness, and Ru means light. And it means that which brings you from the darkness to the light. And that, whatever it is in our lives, where we may see the light shining, that helps remind us of our own light, that is the Guru.
So you see that she is expanding the idea of what a guru is from that which is classically held from the tradition of yoga. And this was counsel to us as students to look at what the teacher is pointing to rather than to become attached to the teacher. One of the things about the teachings is the teachings have borne the test of time. Classical sacred teachings have been around a very, very long time. As teachers, we are human, and so we work towards the ideal, but being human, we falter, and sometimes we don't make that. And so it's important. This is where she wanted to keep pointing towards the teaching and what it was that was being said, rather than the inability to fulfill that every step of the way. And she was very, as a teacher, as I said, she would not allow anybody to see her as a guru, as an authority in that way. She was incredibly supportive of all of us as students to grow and go deeper into our paths and to teach. She always encouraged us. And when she shared from her experience. And when you were lucky enough to be in a class or travel with her, as I did, what you got was her experience of life, her experience of the teachings, and that transmission would stimulate the growth of the student. That's what it would do. She never said, this is the truth or this is the way. She never came in from an authoritarian point of view. She always said, this is what I've experienced. And so again, you have this shift away from that hierarchical relationship between student and teacher that was historically the guru-disciple relationship. David, do you want to add any more to this, since you've been in this position of, we've had these discussions? And
yeah, I've been lucky enough to have these discussions with Rama and with Sraddha Sagar, who have offered a lot of wisdom, as in these last few years, so much has been revealed in various corners of yoga. But first, I would start by just acknowledging that real harm has been done. Human beings have been hurt and frankly continue to be hurt by systems and people. Even some of the images we've seen today may be triggering for some of our audience to recognize that there is not a single lineage or tradition that is known in the mouths of Westerners here in the US, certainly, that has not been touched directly with some form of issue with power, sex, and money abuse. And real human beings have been harmed. And we should never forget that as yoga teachers, yoga practitioners. There needs to be accountability, for sure. And Rama was one of those people who encouraged me personally to not shy away from addressing the harm that was being done in communities that I was trying to clean up. And to say that she offered me once, when I was struggling with this, she asked me, you know, what's stopping you? Like, you're seeing this, and accountability must be had, and you're in a position to do something about it. So what's stopping you? And that returned that question that Rama always reminded me of, which is what's actually happening inside of me in my own mind that's doing that. And that really turned the tide. And then I got, frankly, far more comfortable and confident and bold to address this with a good many other people at my side. So with all that being said, Rama, as Sraddha Sagar has been expressing, also got me personally to understand that judging and othering the human frailties of others was a self-harm to me. And that I needed to take responsibility for my own feelings of anger and frustration and rage at what was being done in our world and to this practice that I love. And to begin to look at things in the more nuanced and realistic and sober way of accountability can be had, but we do not need to be in judgment, and we do not need to burn the world to have justice and fairness and safety in yoga, so that yoga can be free of harm and manipulation at all levels. And for that, I'm really grateful, because she returned me to the gift of understanding that this was entirely in my hands with my teachers and with students and coworkers and other leaders that I have worked with over these years, to say to them, what are you going to do now? Right? What do we do now? How do we help with healing? How do we create peace? Not without accountability, not ignoring the harm, but acknowledging it, moving forward, creating better systems, and in a lot of ways, prioritizing that connection that underlies this entire thing, which is we throw away no one. There is no human being that we are not part of. And Rama continually reminded me not to throw people away. They may have to lose their job. They may have to be held accountable, right? But don't throw them away. And in the same way that Sraddha Sagar just taught us all, we also don't have to throw away the teaching just because some knucklehead behaved in a entirely wrong and pathetically human kind of way. So I hope that's helpful in some way. Didn't know I would speak to this, but Rama has helped with my own healing and in these areas. And I think in a lot of ways, her influence helped install things like the code of conduct, code of ethics, and the scope of practice that are now in place. She absolutely influenced a cleanup of a major lineage that I was part of. And in my other work, she helped me, through me, and others, advise other lineages on what needed to happen for accountability and healing. So it really resonated with me, Mira, when you shared about, if there's a steady light at the center that doesn't waver, then even the really flickery type flames like me, the unsteady ones, can get a spark every once in a while and try to do some good. And that's where my focus is in this area. And I think that yoga is on a better track now. And a big part of that is actually because of these teachings that Rama just shared, and that Sraddha Sagar is channeling for all of us. Yeah.
The important thing that I heard you say, David, too, is that Rama didn't go to the teacher, but to the teachings. And Rama lived it off the mat. And so many people today, and I don't mean to be super critical, but we see people trying to manifest what yoga on the mat. But the most important thing is how she reminded you to take the teachings back into your heart and live them from there, because that's the guru. That's the one that leads you from darkness to light.
I actually did not know Rama at the time that Give Back Yoga Foundation was started, but I can see how there was some influence there, because in 2007, when Beryl Bender Birch and I co-founded Give Back Yoga Foundation, the mission was to support certified yoga teachers of all traditions who want to bring this practice to unserved and underserved populations. And we kept emphasizing all traditions, because at the time, as everyone knows here, my Ashtanga was better than your Kundalini. And everybody was trying to differentiate themselves and outdo the other, when in fact, as Rama was pointing out, there are many methods, there are many ways to go about doing this, and it's all yoga.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for sharing these wonderful thoughts and insights into the world of yoga today. And I'll pick back up with the PowerPoint unless anyone has any last thoughts. Okay. Oops. Okay, so here we are. This is actually, that we've now completed the section on her work with the different gurus and her influences. And now we'll move kind of into her work and how she brought that forth into her teaching. So this is just some pictures of her, articles of her when she went by Mare, which was another name and phase of life. And this is in 1972 in Oakland, California, as this hub was growing and developing. This is a column that she was actually wrote for the Sun newspaper, and she was a regular columnist and would give yoga postures in her column. And these are just some beautiful pictures of her beautifully demonstrating the posture. She embodied the practice of yoga so beautifully and was a great yoga model. And this is the Bay Area Yoga Hub. So this is her teaching in her home. And this was her yoga room in the Maybeck House in Berkeley, where many people gathered, masters came for satsang. And San Francisco at the time, as it says in this article, for whatever reason, cosmic, economic, geographical, or by happenstance, has become the center of the burgeoning movement toward the uniting of Eastern and Western consciousness. So she was right at the center of this burgeoning hub of the explosion of yoga in this country. And she traveled all over. She drove long ways to teach classes all over Northern California. And at one time, she was teaching like 15 to 19 classes a week at a time that she had children and a husband and was also a housewife. And she said, actually, she would gather money for the class and just ball it all up in her purse. And it was her husband who would take it out of her purse and straighten out all the bills. To her, it didn't matter. She was just traveling and she was doing what she loved and in her bhakti and in her teaching. And the demand was so great that she ended up needing to form an organization in order to train more teachers so that she would have substitutes. And this is how the California Yoga Teachers Association began. And they started the first standardization of yoga teacher training. And this is the very inception of the yoga teacher training that has evolved over time now with the Yoga Alliance and standardization. And so this is her teaching in her home, giving yoga training. Then we have the birth of the yoga journal, which she has always said began on her kitchen table. So this was as the hub of the California Yoga Teachers Association was coming together. They formed a newsletter called The Word in order that they be in communication with one another. And that was the inception of what became the Yoga Journal. These are some of the first issues of the Yoga Journal that you see here. And now, of course, we see its evolution into what it's become that you see in grocery stores all over. Some of the original contributors were Judith Lassiter, who eventually took hold over of the Yoga Journal, Ike Lassiter, her husband, Heidi Goldman, Rose Garfinkel, Jean Gardot, Janice Paulson, and Chris Wentworth. So these are some original people involved. And here's Michael Glickson, who is the publisher. And so this is some of the early days of the Yoga Journal at the office and some articles in which she is beautifully modeled. And now, we'll go here we'll come back to Feathered Pipe Ranch. Oh no, I'm sorry. Ginny, if you want to talk about this.
Okay, just briefly. So right around the same time that was going on in the Bay Area, this cauldron of yoga excitement, a woman named India Supera was creating the Feathered Pipe Ranch, a major retreat center in the country, in Helena, Montana. And many of these same people were there helping to organize that, and really by the seat of their pants, as I gather. Heidi Goldman, who was involved with the Yoga Journal, who was one of Rama's students, was one of the first people to work at the Feathered Pipe who was trained as a yoga teacher, trained by Rama. You'll see in the photo on the left, Rama and Judith Lassiter are foreground. I don't know the others, but they were among the first to hold retreats at the Feathered Pipe Ranch. The article on the right is from a yoga journal in 1982, and it shows a picture of Rama teaching her beloved Yoga Sutras.
And Hansa, if you'll talk about unity in yoga.
Okay, so we have quite a few slides here on unity in yoga, so Mira can just kind of go through them at times. But unity in yoga started when Swami Satyananda and Rama were in Sinal in Switzerland, and they came back, and he had suggested that you need to get yoga teachers together. And here's the quote: "Bring the teachers together, for if those who teach in the name of union cannot come together in the spirit of union, who can?" So what they did is they came in, they came back. She, for some reason, stopped in Denver, and then they went to Maryhurst, which is in Portland, and they did their first Unity and Yoga conference. I'm going to give a timeline and then flip back around. And then they went back to Colorado. They came back to Denver, and they did a program in Colorado Springs at El Pomar, and then from there, Rama went ahead to Russia. But during this time that Unity in Yoga was being formed, it kind of started where they went to Maryhurst. These teachers, and this is the first one up here in Portland, Oregon. These teachers all gathered together there, and I'm just going to tell a couple short stories. At Maryhurst, when they did this first conference, there was one group of people that had not been invited. And Ma Sheila was one of the senior people in this tradition. And so one day in the middle of this conference, they come rolling in, and Ma Sheila was in red clothes, and she had a bunch of people, and they had a camera, a TV crew that were recording. And she walks in, and she goes straight up to Rama, filming all the time. And she says, "What are you going to do with the ones who are not invited?" And Rama's response was, "This is a yoga conference, and God is the guest, so all are invited." And from there, Ma Sheila and the others kind of stayed around, and they were talking. And after a while, Ma Sheila stood up, and she was just right in front of Rama, pushing her. And Rama stayed in this center of consciousness that's just only Rama. And Ma Sheila stamped her foot, and she goes, "You guys are just too happy and peaceful. You're not in touch with reality." And she stomped her foot and turned around and walked out. And Rama said, "And there they are." And they went back to their conference without even having it phase. This was how Rama lived this yoga off the mat. So from Maryhurst, then they came up and they went to El Pomar. Well, they met at Patricia's house, a friend of mine here in Denver. And they had 25 people sleeping on her floor, trying to figure out what to do. And they visualized this place that they were going to go that had a cross, that had eagles flying. And everybody was throwing in their wisdom pieces. And so what happened is they got out to get into their cars, and they were going to go up to Estes Park, and somebody said, "No, we've got to go to Colorado Springs." So they went to Colorado Springs, and they ended up at a place called El Pomar, and they set up their first conference at El Pomar, or this is actually their second conference at El Pomar. And the place was a little bit small, so they rented another place down the street. But they came back one day, and here are all these men in black trench coats going through all of their possessions. And come to find out that across the street was NORAD, and President Reagan was there. And they wanted to make sure all these hippies were not going to attack Reagan. And again, just this grace of, "Well, thank you for taking care of us all. Would you like to join us in yoga?" And from there, Rama then went out actually from there to New York, where they developed their Russian project. But over the years, while Rama's multitasking in Russia, we have these other conferences. And I'm going to have Mira just flash through some of these conferences, the many paths. And the next to the last conference was when they did the 1993 conference of 100 Years of Yoga in America. And this is when they had all of these swamis come together celebrating what had happened over the 100 years. And in the next slide is going to be this is more of the people who were there. And I want to point out in the one top picture, there's Rama with some of her teachers, with some of the swamis who were there, with Swami Satyananda, with Yogi Bhajan. There's also the part of the, in the picture down on the bottom left is one of the board of directors that they had over the years. And then I think it's the next slide is that they scan through some of the different swamis, and this will end with a little sharing from Rama about it. So you can see Dr. Ladd, you can see Swami yes, Keshvananda, Amrit Desai, Yogi Bhajan, and now Rama.
Times, even to 100 years ago, even to 50, 40 years ago. The whole ideal of yoga was you withdraw to the mountaintop, and there you seek your own salvation. There you seek your own enlightenment, and you realize this world as the illusion that it is. And the soul goes on beyond the body to reunite with that source. And so one, we hear about the yogis meditating in the caves in the Himalayas. Well, it's true. And I've been with many of those yogis who have been meditating in caves for 20 years in silence. Now there's a whole new changing paradigm that's happening. It's more of an integration of the mountaintop into the marketplace, I call it. And it's integrating those two facets of going within and finding our own inner peace and finding that sense of well-being deep inside, but not withdrawing, but staying in the marketplace and letting it permeate the environment. Contentment is the happiness that is not dependent upon external circumstances. No matter what is happening, no matter if our world is falling apart around us, we have this inner place of peace and contentment and joy that we will feel the difficulties in life, but it won't shake. The word asana is very interesting because we associate it, in this country, mainly with Hatha yoga, because it's the movement of the body, but it's a form of prayer. It's a form of worship in itself, of honoring those life forms. And the term itself means as means to be or to free, and sam means to put it together with, and na is the eternal cosmic vibration. So in asana, the postures of yoga, we are breathing and being and becoming one with the eternal cosmic vibrations.
So as Rama began emphasizing that we are to be growing this and wearing basically the spirit of yoga on our sleeves, I want to point out that all the conferences that they had, nobody was paid to teach at the conferences, and nobody was paid for the transportation. We did it because we wanted to come together. We wanted to be a community. We wanted to have unity in yoga. And yet Rama's calling was larger than that. So in the background, she was doing the international conferences. And I'm going to turn this over to Sraddha to tell us about how what we started in the United States actually continued to grow.
So there's a lot in the international work, but as Hansa said, this really started in the mid 80s. So parallel to the work with the unity in yoga in the United States. And her international work was inspired by her children. And there was an event where a couple of her kids came home from school and they told about how they'd had to do they had to get underneath their desks in the event of a nuclear bomb. So if you go back into the 80s, this would have been a building tension between the superpowers of the Soviet Union and the United States with this imminent threat of nuclear war. This was what was going on politically at the time. And it was her children coming home, being fearful about nuclear war that made her determine that she needed to extend this beyond the nation and she needed to work internationally. And so she began this body of work that she did over a period of 8 to 9 years. And she basically took citizens from the United States to the Soviet Union. And she created an organization, which was the Center for American and Soviet dialogue. So the concept of dialogue, and this is based directly on the Yoga Sutras. Her interest was to bring the citizens together because she felt that if there were enough citizens that came together and saw each other and the oneness that they could have, that they could break free of this systemic governmental tension around war and actually see people for who they really were. And she was always working with that which was common between people, because people, regardless of what country they come from, what color of skin, whatever their orientation, we have common things as human beings. And so this is what she was always emphasizing. And so this began her work in the Soviet Union. Do you want to continue? This is a very significant picture, this one of, this is where Gorbachev is being given an award by her organization. And what she did is that she took those that were in yoga. It was a time where she couldn't really describe or talk to people that she was using yoga as her inspiration for this work. She was doing mediation work at an international level, but she never spoke about that its source was the Yoga Sutras. And so she developed this concept of the citizen diplomat, which has been around, but here she has, what is a citizen diplomat? In recent years, a new kind of citizen has emerged, citizens who can no longer wait for government to solve the world's growing problems, citizens who must speak, act, and stand for what they believe in, citizens with the courage to cross the borders of personal, political, ideological beliefs to embrace the oneness of all humanity. And so you can see how pertinent that is to this time. Here in this, you see some of the players. She brought not just people that were yoga teachers, but there were many more well-known speakers and famous people. We have Barbara Marx Hubbard here. Swami Satchidananda was part of this. And there were, Chris Christopherson even did a concert in Moscow. Here you can see some of the people in this. You have Lilias Folan, Mukunda Stiles was part of the yoga community. There were also, I think we have Patch Adams, and so who is a doctor and an activist. He also was enrolled into this Soviet work. You see a picture of Robin Williams, who played Patch Adams in the movie. And here in this next slide that Mira was, go ahead and show, this is Rama on the road in the airport. This is the yoga in the airport, yoga off the mat. This is the yoga in the marketplace. And so you see what it looks like.
I just wanted to interject quickly here that she really made best use of her time as she had to. And when people would want to talk with her about certain things, there was a man who even booked a flight so he could have a meeting with her on the flight, next to her in the plane. So this is her just in her world. And we have CID with Sraddha.
So this, after the Soviet work completed, which was really around late 80s, then there were other places that were conflict zones, including, this is where Jerusalem and Israel and the West Bank come into play, and her work there in the early 90s. And so in order to accommodate this expansion into other places on the globe, the Center for American-Soviet Dialogue shifted into Center for International Dialogue. And so this is where you see this.
And we have her work with Women of Vision. We're going to kind of move through these next things quite quickly for our time. And so this was also in her fabulous ability to network. I would say the core of what she did in all of these organizations is bringing the people together. And out of that magic of networking and the way that she knew how to bring different choice people together would birth a creation that would take action in the world for change. So she says here, together, let us hold a vision of a world where peace can prevail, where our thoughts, words, and actions are no longer weapons of destruction, but are divinely guided to lift the hearts, minds, and spirits of others. Perhaps if enough of us hold this vision, we can reach a critical mass to impact the collective consciousness of all humanity. So in her consciousness, she was lifting all those around her to a place of the consciousness to hold the place of peace. This wheel in the center here in this Women of Vision brochure shows the different sectors of society, and she would bring women together with common interest and experience to create projects in their specific sector of society. Key people like Eleanor Lacane helped to bring these women together and create regional conferences so that the action, first it was Women of Vision and action was added later, that the action of their vision would continue in their various locations. Here is the wheel of transformation they used. And this was their big national conference in Washington, DC. This is actually her daughter here with her, Andrea Vernon, on her left. Okay, then we have her creation of the American Yoga College.
So we have had conversations about how these organizations overlapped and how Rama could possibly accomplish all that she did. And a lot of times it was with a lot of help. In 1993, she met a woman who was a devotee of Sri Aurobindo, who was a very important teacher to Rama. And she commanded Rama to start a yoga school. And indeed she did. By 1995 or 97, along with the help of Mukunda Stiles and Nancy Ford Cohn, they created the American Yoga College. At that time, the workshops, intensives that would provide credits for yoga teacher certification were done in modules on the East Coast, Virginia and Boston. After a while, the AYC resided in Sedona with much support from Robin Gut and also workshops organized by Johanna Mosca. Then prior to my becoming director in 2003, AYC was guided by a group of people in California, Joy Lindsay, Sandy Stober, Joan Jagir, and also Zore Afsarzadeh from New Mexico. Their workshops were held all around Marin County, Monterey, California, Santa Barbara, Santa Fe. And then in 2004, after a trip to Afghanistan with Sraddha, the name was changed to the International Yoga College. And the college found a home in Sedona, the first time it had a college with walls. We called it the College Without Walls. And the next couple of slides show some of the retreats that also included graduation ceremonies. So a very exciting time for the Yoga College. This was that last slide was a very fun trip to what I called the middle of nowhere to have a retreat by the Gila River in New Mexico. It was quite a feat to gather all the people there.
And I think in interest of time, we'll just end on her international work in Afghanistan and Palestine, and then we'll close with her chant. So Sraddha, if you want to talk to this. You're muted.
Sorry. So this is alongside the work that was being done in the United States. Again, there was this teaching of yoga internationally. You see on the left, this is her in Moscow teaching asana. And then there was a trip that she and I took with my sister, a few others, just a small group of us that went to Afghanistan. Again, Rama was attracted to conflict zones and bringing the yoga into places, and then seeing if there were people that were interested in training in peace. So this is part of her peace activism. So there we are in 2004. Then again, another trip into Palestine. This is 2015. This is where This is the trip that Maha arranges with Give Back Yoga and Rob Schwer. And all of us go there to teach yoga in various, at Farasha Yoga, which is the yoga center that Maha helped found. And there we introduce yoga therapy in workshops to Palestinians in the West Bank, in Ramallah, and with translators. And so we had to include this wonderful picture of Rob with the camel as well, if you notice that. And then in the center of it, just as a note, there is she had done work in Jerusalem and in Palestine in the 90s with Zugbi. So you have several places in Bethlehem where there is some activism going on that's nonviolent activism and such that carries the spirit of the yoga. And so here is a meeting that we had with him, reconnecting with him, all the students, all the teachers. We are working with counselors from refugee camps and teaching them yoga therapy, working with kids in the refugee camps and such.
And I think all of this exhibits my mom's very special ability to take yoga off the mat and into the world and use it in key places in the world that really needed conflict zones. She went into the heart of conflict and not running from it, but taking the piece of yoga into the heart of the conflict. And so here we will now just focus on her legacy, and then we'll do our closing. And so here is just us. This is a photo shoot of her asana manual that she put together that Sraddha and I were key parts of. And this is what we have in recorded form from her and beautiful teachings. Is this beautiful book on asana, and she's actually an incredible writer, and there's deep transmission within her words, and she was always very careful in her editing that the transmission of her teachings really come through the words. Many people have reflected that to me in her writing. And then we have this project on the Yoga Sutras, which is pictured here from book 2, and her beautiful commentary. It's really a manual moving through life, and her recorded teachings of the Yoga Sutras, and some of her chanting of her beautiful voice. And so if any of you want to dive deeper into her teachings, all of this is available on her website at rama.yoga, and we're all working to continue getting her teachings out into the world. And so the work will continue, and updates will be made on the website. And so keep checking on that, and her social media is also moving forward. I just wanted to communicate that the legacy also really lives on through her students. And so this is a quote from one of her senior students, Pavani Maki. And she says, "We are all daughters of Rama's legacy, blessed with the trove of her feminine wisdom into the sutras. She changed all our lives for the better and articulated so beautifully what our hearts could not put into words, but was so clear. Every week when I opened her book to prepare for my sutra mentorship, I feel I am blessed with her darshan, and I shed a tear of gratitude. Sahasrara pranam, 1,000 bows." And so we plan to get a directory of all of her students who are teachers together to put on her website. So check there if you would like to see the teachers that are continuing on her yoga legacy. And Ginny, anything you wanted to add to that?
I think that's it. Just there was a question about if the sutras would be completed, and I answered that yes, they will be, and we will complete other works as we can. So please keep checking back, sign up for the newsletter, and we'll keep in touch with what we have available. There's also on the website information about a fund for end-of-life expenses for the family, and you can donate to that. There's information there on how to do that. Thank you.
Okay, and this is a closing in her own words that she wrote about a decade ago when she had a near-death experience then, and was gifted another decade of her life to help move her legacy forward. She says, "I thank you from the depth of my heart, which is now strong again, for keeping me in this world so that I may finish the last vestige of my work, which many of you have called leaving the legacy. You all are the legacy. The creativity of your teachings will inspire thousands with yoga, in whatever name or form that may take. You are the teacher of teachers, the legacy that preserves and passes the teachings on. You are the yoga with every step, every breath, every action and interaction you bring to your life." And here we will just close with her closing. Thank you all for coming and attending and being a part of this journey, honoring the life and legacy of Rama Jyoti Vernon.
Inhale. Really feel that peace. Feel that it's already there in every aspect of your being. The koshas, the doshas, the physical, the subtle, the spiritual bodies, the pranic bodies. And can you feel that balance between the right and left hip, the right and left buttock bone, knowing that as you balance this, the base, you balance the hemispheres of the brain in the union of yoga. Om Jai. And now let your thoughts fan out to embrace every part of your life. Whatever feels it is imbalanced, hold to the balance that already is. Embrace all those who have ever walked the path of your life with you, or those who have crossed it, and those with whom there has been discord in the past. Clear it within your own heart and just feel that peace. And now we let our consciousness, our awareness, fan out from ourselves, from our lives, and all those in our lives, to those within this country and beyond the borders, to embrace all those who have been affected by the decisions within this country, by our new leaders. And we let that consciousness soar beyond all borders, beyond all blame, beyond all anger, for anger disempowers. And ask, what is our mission now in life? Has our Dharma changed? Or is there something we can do in the midst of the fulfillment of our Dharma? remember that one's own work done imperfectly is far better than another's done perfectly. And we embrace this world with our heart as well as our arms, and hold it as the great compassionate ones have held us. Let's just take the Om together and send the benefit of our time together today, this afternoon, out to the entire world. Inhale. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Namaste. Thank you.